Hey Steven, how are you?
What's going on, Felix? Doing well, man. How's it out in the West Coast?
It's been good, man. It's been good. I keep myself busy here, I can't complain.
Nice, nice.
How is everything? Where are you right now?
So now I'm located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Actually, the weather's been like really nice, so I've just been getting out with my dog a lot. His name's Toby. He's a golden retriever. So I live downtown in the city, and I just there's a nice little trail by the river, so I take him out for walks. Try to take him out almost every day, but it's been like in the high 90s, so I've been giving him a little bit of a break. But everything's been good, man. With the quarantine and everything, it's been challenging. I definitely think the day and age right now is a little tough in different ways, and it's weighing and affecting everyone. But just been trying to lean into my community, lean into my work, and some of my hobbies and passion projects. But it's been good. It's been really good.
That's good to hear, man. And I really appreciate that you're here to talk about a topic that I really care about, and you obviously too, which
Yeah,
is depression.
yeah.
And I think it's such an important topic to cover, such an important topic to shine light on, because I have the feeling it got better, but still in society, it still has this stigma of, yeah, let's not talk about it, or because we can't see it, it's not there. And this is why I really appreciate your time and talking about your experience with it.
Absolutely. And that's why I tell you, because that stigma is still real, because I know I was nervous to come on to talk about it, because I'm still quiet about it with many, because you worry about what people think and what they'll associate it. And I think a lot of that is because we live in a culture where like we want to assume that depression doesn't happen. And when it does happen, there's a big, big problem. And I think depression there's varying levels of it. Like we're going to talk about like the clinical and, manic depression and other, slight depression. But like, I think throughout life, we're going to go through life and we're going to have tough seasons of life. Some seasons are going to be, we might walk through a season of depression. And I don't think that means that your life is over, but we'll get there. But I think it's a process. And I likewise agree. I really wish more people talked about it, because I think when people do find themselves in it, they realize that there is hope and there is a process out of it. You know what I mean? But I think society, I think the workplace is starting to talk a lot more about mental health, which I'm excited about, but I still don't think we're there yet.
It's totally. And when we talked to each other earlier on the phone, you were mentioning that your experience with depression was actually during undergrad, correct?
Yeah, right at the end of my college experience, and I could start going on about it now if you want. But pretty much, I grew up, I went to Penn State University. I studied architectural engineering. I was in a 5-year program, and I had one of the most incredible college experiences you could think of. By the end of I think by the end of my 4th year going into my 5th year, I was named the new face of civil engineering in the country. I led several student organizations on campus. I had a lot of friends, and I was experiencing so many cool experiences. And then my last year of college happened, and I think a bunch of things happened that came to head. We could go into those details, but I hit like a wall. I fell into definitely a deep depression, probably my whole last year. And it's interesting because when I look back, it was a tough spot. But when I look back, I could still smile in certain ways, because despite the tough times that year, there were still some good things that happened and still some meaningful relationships. I think when you walk through a season of depression, you could feel like you're robbed and you feel like you'll never get those memories again, but they're there and they're a part of you. So, but yeah, during my last year of college, it came and it hit out of nowhere. When I look back, I could see the things that were leading up to it. I just didn't realize it until I was kind of stuck into it, you know what I mean? And kind of just experiencing like this hopelessness and kind of a combination too of a lack of sense of direction. I started to withdraw from some of my closest friends. Yeah, I could go on and on, but I'm sure you might have some other questions about all I just said.
No, no, that's totally fine. But walk us through a little bit here of, so you were mentioning everything went pretty well in college, and up to the point when you hit senior year, and all of a sudden you felt like, was there a moment when you felt, okay, something is off here?
Yeah, pretty early on, because I think what was going on, and I had dealt with some anxiety up to this point, and the anxiety heightened to a way where it kind of fully consumed me, where I just wasn't present anymore. You know what I mean? I was really self-in tune with what I was going on in my thought life, and I just wasn't like genuinely happy. And I think the thing that helped me, like I had a lot of good things happening, but I just couldn't feel the joy of what was happening in the present moment. It felt like this out of body experience. I didn't feel like I was really truly present there. But like a good example I could tell you is when I was on student court for Penn State, and I was on the football field at halftime from the recognized student court, and I was just like not feeling what I should be feeling in that moment. You know what I mean? Kind of like this present, full of excitement, 100,000 people in the stands cheering, and I'm there just like struggling. You know what I mean? And when I say struggling, just trying to be present and just straight up depressed and sad, you know, and that kind of made it worse. I was like, I have everything to be grateful for, but why aren't I happy? You know? So I think, you know, I think that some of the things leading up to when I thought I was there is just when I just started to feel unpresent and just not being able to feel what I probably should be feeling. And that's a whole other topic of conversation too, because sometimes it's okay to feel not present. You know what I mean? It's, again, emotional life is a whole thing to talk about, because I don't think we grow up in a culture that teaches us and shows us how to manage our emotions, how to process and deal with our inner feelings, you know?
That's an interesting point, because sometimes people, they don't really know the difference between, for example, sadness and depression. They would say, hey, it's like more or less the same, you know, although sadness is an emotion, you know, we can feel sad daily about certain stuff, but that depression is this real illness which is there, which you have to like treat, you know,
Yeah.
to make it better. And it's one thing to feel sad about something that you experienced in the past or now, and just sad about it, but eventually get over it. But with depression, I would say it's a complete different game here, and it's like you need help. So was there for you this point where you told yourself, or maybe your friends, family, or whoever it was, I have depression?
Yeah, so I know I actually started seeing a therapist early on in college to work through with anxiety. And I encourage everyone like to work with a counselor, even if you think you're fine. I mean, you know, we're all had cases in certain ways. So I think it's important, because you think about it, you grow up your whole life and you go get a physical every single year, but you never go to a doctor for them to assess the thoughts that you're thinking and the emotional life that's going on, right? So I think it's important that we all go through. So I kind of, you know, I dealt with anxiety. But I think my last year, when I spoke with my counselor at the time, it was starting to get worse. And I talked with her and I talked with family and loved ones. And, you know, I was fortunate. You know, I had loved ones call me almost every day and support me through it. But I know some might not have that luxury, right, or that privilege. And if there's one thing that's important, I would tell people, if you're in a season of depression, it's to really get help right away, whether it's professional help, especially if you're in college. Like nowadays, there's so many programs at universities and the resources are there. And if you're just too tired to do it, there's got to be someone in your life, and just tell them what's going on. You might be surprised how someone will step up and either they'll go make the appointment for you, they'll carry you there. But I do believe that everyone has someone in their life that's willing to come alongside them and get in a journey with them. And I think that's what people really desire that are going through a tough season of depression. They just want someone, you know, may not be able to feel what they feel, but they want someone to come alongside them and kind of be with them and just experience it with them.
Yeah, I think I understand, because you also want to, at the same time, I mean, you're so vulnerable, but at the same time, you want to open up and be vulnerable to other people so they could relate and could understand to help you. And it's interesting because it's for people from the outside who've never experienced depression. It's really hard to capture it, how it feels like. And when I was doing research on Sarah Silverman, who speaks very openly about her experience with depression early on, already when she was 13, she mentioned this scenario or the situation where her stepdad actually asked her, how does it actually feel like? She, in a sense, beautifully described it as in, you know, you feel like you're desperately homesick, but you're home. And this really struck me, because we all know what it feels like to be super homesick, especially when we were younger. But just this feeling that you can't do anything about it because you're home was just blowing my mind. And this would be my question for you, of like, is there a way to describe it, how it felt like?
Yeah, it's interesting, because it's whenever I talk about it now, it's actually, sometimes it's hard to talk about and reflect because it feels like it didn't even happen. And as I'm talking about it, it's like I want to be accurate. I want to make sure I'm being truthful, talk about, because it's an important topic. But I feel like where like God's brought me in the healing process, sometimes it's hard to describe what it was like, because like it's not like I don't forget it, but like it feels like it never happened, which is crazy to think. But I would agree with that though, in the sense of it's like you're feeling homesick, but you're still home. And I think it goes on what I was saying earlier of like you can't explain, like you're feeling not where you're at. You know, it's hard to explain, but I think if I'm coming back to kind of what it felt like, I think there is like a hopelessness type of feeling. You know, I think a good way is this, you just feel overwhelmed with this phrase that everything is meaningless. Like, what's the point? You know, and I think that's a good way to sum up what the feeling's like, because it's like sad doesn't really explain it. It's just like a dark place where it's like, what's the point? You know what I mean? Like this job I'm going to have when I got, that doesn't make me happy. This relationship, this doesn't make me happy. Like nothing makes me happy. So everything is meaningless. Like, what is the point? And it's, I don't know if that's a feeling or what that is, but that's kind of, I think, what it's like when you kind of be in that place.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to describe it. And it's still then so hard to understand it from another person's perspective of like, okay, like literally saying to everything, what's the point here? So this was pretty much these were like your symptoms going through it when you were when you're suffering depression. Like, okay, no more fun among your friends, questioning everything, and just being in this dark place.
Yeah, it's very accurate, especially too, like the lack of feeling, kind of like this numbness. I like to kind of describe it as almost like a soul death. And when you look like the human soul, what I've learned, it's comprised of three faculties. One being your intellect, second being your human emotion, and three being your will. So kind of within the human soul, you're having your thoughts and your feelings and your choices, and kind of seeing those things die. So it's like the way you think, the way you feel, and the decisions you make, like nothing just seems aligned, and it just doesn't work. You feel like a zombie. I guess you just feel like a dead man walking. Like, I don't know, I would just like walk to class or going to go somewhere. It was so, it's hard to explain. It just felt like it just wasn't working. Like your emotional life just wasn't working, and when I look back, there were definitely still some things good that were happening, but it robbed you of a lot of joy. You know what I mean? It was a deep place of pain, and yeah, it's weird to talk about because it's been several years now, and that's what I want to say. There's hope for people walking through it now. Like there's definitely hope for healing in it.
Yeah, and how old are you now?
26. So I was 22, 23. Yeah, it's about 3 years. Yeah, 3 years ago I graduated. So 3 to 4 years ago now.
And you were mentioning earlier that actually everything went pretty smooth for you. So the question I have is, was there a specific trigger moment during this time, or maybe before, you would think that literally triggered
The depression?
falling into depression? Yeah.
Oh, 100%. I think honestly what it was, I think a component of it was burnout. And I went through a lot of counseling. I went through a long healing process and a self, exploratory, reflection, and to kind of see what was happening. And I was kind of a ticking time bomb. There were definitely symptoms of depression leading up to this. I just didn't realize that at the time. Kind of like just being a loner, kind of just self-isolating. For some, it's interesting when I hear that because they say I'm extroverted, but I like to say I'm an ambivert. I'm introverted and extrovert, kind of a combination of both. But I think I hit this place of burnout. And there was another trigger moment too. And in a nutshell, all my life, I dreamed of building skyscrapers around the world, right? That was my dream my whole life. And actually the summer before all this happened, I got to, experience that dream. And I was just so mammothly unfulfilled from that experience. And I think that was the biggest trigger for me because I lived my whole life. You know what I mean? Like I would draw skyscrapers as a kid. I would take the Staten Island Ferry into Manhattan and walk around the skyscrapers all by myself, just looking up, dreaming to do that one day, from a young age. And my whole high school career, my whole college career I was a man on a mission. I was going to build skyscrapers, and that was what's going to make me the happiest person. That was what's going to give me meaning, give me purpose, and give me fulfillment. And then when I experienced it and then get all those things I hoped I'd get is just when I hit rock bottom. And I think that, along with being burnt out, was just a recipe for disaster. You know what I mean? And I had to learn a lot through that process, and it was a journey.
And it's interesting that you mentioned rock bottom, because I would think this whole process was rather like this quiet process where depression would slowly come into your life. And was there a moment when you thought, or looking back now, yeah, this was definitely a moment where I hit rock bottom, so it couldn't go any worse?
Any worse? Oh yeah. I'm trying to think. I think there were several points in my last year. I think the rock bottom piece was when I started to have like suicide ideation, kind of like that idea of it's funny because you hear in media and you see when famous people that seem to have it all and they commit suicide, and people wonder, wow, I can't understand it. And the best way to explain it's I was in a place where I could understand why someone hurting that much would feel led that way, because you feel like everything's meaningless. So you feel completely hopeless, and you lose your sense of direction, sense of worth, your sense of passion and purpose and meaning. And I think that's when I hit rock bottom, when I just started to have those thoughts of wow, I wish I just wasn't here. You know what I mean? And kind of I just had no hope, because everything that I loved, and I'm a very passionate person, and everything I loved, I just despised. And it was the craziest thing. It was just wow, I've become this toxic, bitter person. I'm not grateful for things I should be grateful for. All these things were going on. And I think that was the rock bottom point, was when I just really started to have those thoughts of where I just had no hope. You know what I mean? It was almost life should just be over now. You know what I mean? I think that was kind of the rock bottom moment. I think it happened quite a few times throughout college. That last year of college.
It's crazy because, as you said, you seem like a super positive extrovert, that's like happy being around people, helping other people. And you telling me now that I actually had this phase in my life where I hit rock bottom, where I didn't have hope anymore, where I didn't see progress anymore, and where I pretty much told myself, what's the point? It's just blowing my mind. And this is so, in my opinion, for people who never suffered depression, so hard to understand, but it's so crucial that they understand, hey, even though you don't see it and you think on the surface this person is fine, it doesn't say anything about how this person is feeling from the inside, because it's one way to mask it and the other way of how you really feel.
Oh man, I feel like there's so much to say there. I think especially on the masking part, I definitely masked it. And I know it's funny when you mentioned too, like now I'm like surprised. Like there was a point where I never thought I'd be like me again. And that was, tough. And like, that's why sometimes talking about this now, I feel like I'm being an imposter, because someone feels that doesn't mean I don't struggle anymore. I'm sure we're going to talk about that later. But back to what you said about the masking part, I was definitely guilty of that. You know what I mean? Like I was in a relationship at the time and that person knew, my family knew, some friends here and there knew, but for the most part, no one had any idea. I'm curious, because I'm a very emotional person. It's hard to hide it, but like I open up to some people and they're like, wow, I didn't know. And it's so funny because when I look back, all I wanted was for people to know what was going on, but like I didn't open up, and again, it's one of those things you have to be sensitive. You can't just go tell everyone. Now I'm not saying not to be open about it, but it's a trust thing, right? Because you want to let people into your life to help you, but it's that trust part and the vulnerability part, because when you're in a really like a really vulnerable spot like depression, things could affect you even more. You know what I mean? You're a lot more sensitive. I think it's almost like your wound is completely wide open. It's like the surgeon didn't sew you up yet. So who you let in, you got to be careful who you let in to kind of minister to you at that point. But I definitely had a mask on, and I was wondering if people realize, because I gained. I was actually looking at pictures today, and I actually gained 70 pounds or so my last year of college. And it was in less than a year. I was looking at a picture, like it was from like October to May. I gained 70 pounds. That's a big, weight jump, So I was wondering if people wonder what was going on, because all people say the freshman 15 and what about the senior 50? But there was a lot going on. I definitely, self-medicated with food and Ben and Jerry's. But yeah, there was definitely a problem. And I don't know. It's fun. It's even now, even with being 3 years ago, it's like, I'm grateful to talk about with you and to those listening. It's an experience I want to talk more about. Because it was meaningful. It completely changed my life, my relationship with God. And I think my whole life direction is completely different. And I'll tell you, there was so much bitterness that I dealt with the first year and a half out of college. I was so angry that I went through that my last year of college, because my last year of college was supposed to be like the victory lap. You know what I mean? Like I achieved all this stuff. I had a job lined up. It was just going to be the year to just take it all in and experience it, have fun and be with my friends. And I feel like all that was robbed. So I was so angry that I went through that. But now when I look back at it, it's different. Like I look back with like gratitude, and now I see a sense of purpose for my life. I see meaning, and I feel more resilient and more perseverance. And because now after experiencing rock bottom, I don't know if anything else could get me to that. Because it's like rock bottom. Like when you're building a skyscraper and you're digging up that excavation, you get the bedrock. And when you have bedrock, that's when you start to build. And I think we all got bedrock within ourselves. And I think once you experience that you could withstand and rebuild from bedrock, there's nothing in the world that's going to tear you down again. So not to get all motivational here, but I think it's really something interesting to think about, because we're all resilient and there's always a reason to never give up. And I know I was there. Like I was, it was really hard to be persistent. And I didn't want to be like, I just wanted to give up. I didn't want to have to fight that battle, but I've learned sometimes the best way to fight and be persistent is by not fighting at all. Is just by feeling, being present, sitting with your emotions, asking God to come in and help you, and just taking a step forward. Maybe if you don't get out off the couch one day, that's okay. Like just one day at a time, one step at a time, one thought at a time type of situation. I think that's one way to go about it. And I hope this is encouraging to people. I'm sure people watch this are probably going through something, really challenging. And I hope my overly positive personality isn't being insensitive or discouraging, but there's hope,
It was a beautiful way to describe it. And for me, it sounded like dealing with it, go slowly to go fast in a sense.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. You want to take time, because again, like I like to look at mental health as kind of like your soul health. And if you look at like the physical side, of the human body, when you're gonna get surgery on you or there's something going on internally, there's a slow healing process. It's not just gonna happen overnight. You know what I mean? And I think you gotta trust the doctor, you gotta trust the process, you have to trust the time, you gotta make sure the right ointments are being applied. When I say ointments, the kind of right psychotherapy or the conversations and the reflections. Yeah, I think those things are really important with that process.
And I was wondering now, so you realized, okay, this is really rock bottom. It can't get any worse from here. So what or who was there to help you to actually get out of this? Like, what did you do to yourself? You were mentioning you were going to a therapist, and what helped you actually battling and defeating eventually depression?
Yes, I feel like a lot of people. I know my parents were very huge. You know what I mean? Like both my parents, my mom and my dad, they were incredibly supportive, even though being far away. And I think the thing that really stuck to me was just they expressed how much they cared about me, and that meant a lot. In indirect ways. And I think the one thing that stood out to me was when I was going through it, and I was very open with my parents about what I was dealing with. And when I expressed to my mom how I was struggling, and I saw her reaction, that really touched me. You know what I mean? Because I saw how much it affected her, which means like no parent wants to see their child suffering. And when I saw her, it was just a level of love I feel like I never experienced. You know what I mean? Like wow, like I got to keep going here, and there was that. And there were some friends in college that were really rocks to lean on and I could just talk with and be open about it. But most of all was I worked with this Christian psychologist. His name's Dominic Herbst. And it's really interesting. My dad told me about him like several years earlier before I'm in college, and never thought to talk with him. So I was wrestling with some things at that point. My dad was like, you should talk to this person. He works with XYZ. He's only an hour away from campus. You should go work with him. I was like, we'll see. And I shot him a call one day. I'll never forget it. It was right before Penn State beat Ohio State in the wideout game in like 2016. He stormed the field. Amazing game, which that's a whole story too, because there's a lot going on there emotionally too. But yeah, I had this conversation with him, and he was like, hey, like, are you open to having a faith-based approach to dealing with this? I said, yeah, absolutely. I grew up Catholic, my faith's really important to me. And I was like, if I'm being honest, I felt like I've battled this. I've been wanting to grow closer to God, and I'm just been searching for deeper answers to the questions I had in life. And he was like, yeah. So we started meeting about every week or so in the second semester. And we went through this workbook. It was called like the Restoring Relationships Journal. And up until this point, what kind of gave me hope was, I experienced some trauma as a kid. I think we all experience different hardships and traumas growing up, right? And I think the world doesn't teach us how to process those, right? So if I'm backing up for a second, I hope I tie this together, right? But I think when you're growing up in life and you dealt an emotional wound, it could be bullying, it could be divorce, parents, it could be anything, right? And if you look at that as a wound, and then you take that example and look at it like a physical wound, like a paper cut, if you get a paper cut and you never do anything to heal it, if you don't put any ointment or Neosporin on it, over time it could become an infection, right? And something so small as a paper clip could end up becoming a whole infection, right? And sometimes if your arm is infected, you have to cut your arm off or something. It's the same thing in the soul and spiritual realm too. If you're dealt an emotional wound by someone and you never go through a healing process, as time trickles on, it's going to get worse and worse and worse and trickle. And I think that's what happened to me. I dealt with some hardships when I was in my younger days, and I thought I dealt with it by just stuffing it and never processing it. But over time, it became a soul infection. And that's what I learned with work with this Christian psychologist. And I learned that it's when we struggle with depression, sometimes it's a symptom of an underlying thing happening deep within. There's something that you've never grieved from, something that you never lamented from, right? Because we talk about depression and we talk about sadness, but we live in a world where no one talks about grieving as much and lamenting. And when I say lamenting, that's when you're grieving in community alongside other people. Think about why is crying a great thing? Why do babies cry so much? Maybe they're healing constantly, right? But I think we need to understand that grieving is a process. We should encourage people to grieve. I never really grieved that much growing up, so I wasn't surprised where I was at. But working with him, it made me realize, this phrase that I grew up hearing all the time was that God is the savior for our souls, and I heard that a bajillion times growing up. I never realized what that meant. And he kind of characterized Jesus to me as the great physician and a healer. And I know, and like in the scripture in the Bible, and we know Jesus is a figure that did a lot of physical healings. But I think it's easy for us to forget about the emotional healing that could happen too in relationship with God, because I think that's what we all need. I think one of the things that led to me to get hope and come out of depression was just this process of going through a really deep emotional healing. There's so much to unpack. It's a lot to talk about.